Hello and welcome to this short presentation that I have decided to put together. My name is Ron Harvey with Echelon Environmental, and I've been studying the Ebola issue now for about a week and a half full-time because my company is going to be participating, if needed, in the decontamination of buildings and vehicles. And we're also looking to help with the training for some of the healthcare workers that are going to be using personal protective equipment that they're not used to using. So we're going to be working with some of the local hospitals on that. But after a week of studying the Ebola issue, I have come to a conclusion, and I wanted to share that with you all this evening. Edmund Burke well stated that no passion so effectively robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as fear. And Ralph Waldo Emerson very succinctly stated that knowledge is the antidote to fear. And what we are dealing with right now, in America in particular, is fear. Ebola is a disease, and fear is a disease. One is a disease of the body, and the other is a disease of the mind. Interesting little image here of the Ebola virus, how it, to me, seems to resemble snakes. And we know that there is kind of an innate dislike in humans for snakes. So here we have this snake-like organism, and we have this inbred fear of that particular organism. But what I have discovered here is that the Ebola disease, the Ebola virus, is not what the press is making it out to be. This diagram here shows the relative transmissibility of different viruses. The transmissibility obviously being the ability or the likelihood of a virus being transmitted from one person to another. And you can see on this scale here where 0 means there's no chance of transmission, and then the scale here goes up to approximately 20. Ebola and hepatitis C are approximately at the bottom of the scale with a relative, the value itself is called the R0. That's the name of this value that they have measured. And the meaning here is that for every person that is sick with Ebola, if they are just generally allowed to circulate or to have the maximum ability to transmit the virus, will transmit it to only 2 other people. The same with hepatitis C. And if you go up the scale here, mumps, the average person is able to transmit that disease to 10 other people. Measles, that virus is transmitted from one person to, on average, 18 other people. So, just this scale alone shows you that the Ebola virus is a weakly transmitted disease. You don't go around seeing too many people wearing dust masks and wondering how they're going to keep from getting hepatitis C. The Ebola and hepatitis C are on approximately the same scale of transmissibility. Now, the Ebola virus itself is relatively easily treated. Here we have a chart or a little demonstration of the descending order of resistance to germicidal chemicals. In other words, the germs at the top here, bacterial spores. I don't recognize either of those. Bacillus subtilis, cute. And those are at the top of the scale in terms of being difficult to treat with germicidal chemicals. The treatment obviously meant to disinfect contaminated materials or items. Tuberculosis is next down on the scale as a mycobacteria that is a little less difficult to treat, but just below that, polio and rhinoviruses are at about the middle of the scale, along with fungi. The candida are relatively well known. Vegetative bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus and Salmonella, Enterococci, which are the E. coli type bacteria. If I'm correct, I'm not an expert on pathogens. Those are much more easily treated than some of the others, and right at the bottom of the scale, lipid and medium-sized viruses, as in herpes, HIV, hantavirus, and Ebola, are at the bottom of this scale, which indicates that they are the most easily treated viruses that are on the scale. There's none that are any easier to treat. So again, the fear that a lot of people are having is that this virus is just going to get out of hand. I hear a lot of people, it's going to get away from them. Well, the bottom line is it's easy to control because it is easily disinfected. Another very interesting thing I found here is Ebola and the chain of infection. This is a sequence of events that must occur for a pathogen to be transmitted from one person to another. There are 4 steps to the chain of infection. The presence of a pathogen of sufficient virulence, virulence being its aggressive nature to want to find new hosts. It's basically related to the transmissibility. So we're talking about a relatively easily transmitted virus. Step 2 is that you have to have a relatively high concentration of the pathogen. In other words, if someone is sick and let's say it's an airborne virus and they sneeze, in the particles that they are sneezing, the little aerosol, there has to be a sufficient quantity of the pathogenic materials, particularly viruses, in that the material that they just ejected out of their mouth. If there is not a high enough concentration of the pathogen in those particles, it simply doesn't have the ability to infect someone else. So the third step is that there's a mechanism for the pathogen to be transmitted to the host. The mechanism, for instance, airborne would be sneezing, coughing. That would be about it. And then for other diseases, the mechanism for transmission is physical contact, or contact with surfaces, or like for HIV, it has to be sexual contact, or the hepatitis C has to be blood-to-blood contact. So that's the mechanism for the pathogen. And the fourth step is that there has to be a portal in the host that is susceptible to entry for this invading virus. If there's no portal, then the transmission obviously isn't going to be completed. So in the chain of infection, all of these requirements for the chain of infection must be present. The absence of any one element will prevent transmission. So remember that. There has to be 4 separate things that happen together and at the same time in order for you to be infected by a virus or some other disease. Okay, this was some very interesting statements here. Transmission among humans is almost exclusively among caregiver family members or healthcare workers who tend to the very ill. So the only ones that have been infected by humans, the only humans that have been infected by this virus are those that have been trying to care for their own sick family members or health care. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen in America. The only people that have that the disease has been transmitted to are healthcare workers. No members of the public at large have been infected by Ebola. They have to have come in direct contact with the Ebola victim. If you are walking around, you are not infectious to others. In other words, it has been frequently stated, and it's true, that if you do not have any symptoms, you are not contagious. But at the same time, if you are still well enough to be walking around, the pathogen load in your body is insufficient to get anyone else sick. So in other words, if you're still up and about, you are not infectious to others. And then the last one here, you will not contract Ebola if you do not touch a dying person. Now, these three statements are from the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, which is funded by the World Health Organization. But basically, again, it says that if you're a healthcare worker and you're dealing with a patient that is seriously ill, you have a significant chance of exposure to the virus. If you are not touching somebody that's literally overcome by the virus, you cannot get it. Okay, pretty simple. So, quick quiz for everybody. Quiz, the question, do you have Ebola? Have you touched vomit, blood, sweat, saliva, urine, or feces of someone who might have Ebola? No? Answer, you do not have Ebola. I kind of like the way that was very simply put. Now, I wanted to do a little comparison here. In terms of the actual risk to members of the public, comparing the Ebola outbreak, as they're calling it, or really it's more a scare, the Ebola scare. Let's see, about 1 in every 25 patients that enters a hospital will get an infection during treatment. 1 in every 25. If you go into a hospital as a patient, well, the next line here. Each year, more than 700,000 patients acquire hospital-associated illnesses, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. 700,000 each year pick up a sickness from the hospital, from just going into the hospital. They come out with something new. In 2011, about 75,000 patients died from those infections, or more than twice the number of people killed in automobile accidents. 75,000, and this happens every single year. It goes up and down, obviously, but it's a pretty serious, that is a significant number of people. 75,000 people die just because they go to the hospital. All right, AIDS. In 2010, 15,500 people died from AIDS. There's no known cure for the AIDS virus, the HIV virus. Rotavirus, which produces basically just a very severe sickness, in particular particular gastrointestinal, right? 100 million cases globally every year, 440,000 deaths annually from rotavirus. You heard about that one in the news? And by the way, most of those deaths are in children under 5 years old. Influenza, 3 to 5 million cases per year, depending upon how nasty the virus is that year. Between 3,000 and 49,000 deaths per year, just from the flu. The flu. Okay. The flu. 3,000 to 49,000 deaths per year. Ebola. Since 1976, there have been 2,387 reported cases. That may be up a few by now, obviously, which is an average of 66 cases per year reported. In that same period, 1,590 reported deaths, an average of 42 per year. 42. And the rotavirus was 440,000 per year. Okay, so Ebola, overall fatality rate of 67%. Not going to go into that number, but I think that's probably a little inflated also, simply because of where the these outbreaks were happening in Africa, where they certainly weren't getting the top-notch support, medical support that they would be able to get here in America. So, the bottom line that I would like to express here is that your likelihood of getting Ebola is approximately 0. The people that were on the airplane with the person that a few days later came down sick with the virus, their chances of getting sick of the Ebola virus are 0. It simply isn't going to happen. What we're dealing with here is fear. And what I've tried to do is to give you a little knowledge about the Ebola virus. So I certainly do hope that you can take the information that I've given you today and digest it. Really, understand that, and I'm going to stick my neck out again. I've already done it, but I'm going to say that the Ebola virus is not going to destroy America. It's not going to kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people, as some of the news reports have probably stated. They love nothing better than a good scare. And that's exactly what this is. The disease is going to be controlled. Everything is going to be okay. So, please, don't be afraid. Take the knowledge you have just received and put it to good use. I'm sure you've got other things in your life that are much more pressing in terms of causing any kind of worry. So, this is Ron Harvey with Echelon Environmental. I do hope you've enjoyed my presentation this evening, and you're going to be okay. All right? Thank you. Goodbye.